Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual public meeting for the I-95 Stamford Planning and Environment Linkages Study. We'll get started at 12 p.m. in just a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual public meeting for the I-95 Stamford Planning and Environment Linkages Study, also called a PEL study. My name is Marcy Miller, and I'll serve as the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm with FHI Studio, which is part of the Stantec consulting team. The time is 12:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll now start the meeting. Welcome. Before we get into the meeting format and logistics, please know that we have Spanish interpreters at this meeting. I will ask them to introduce themselves now, and they will provide instructions to join their room and hear the translated version of the presentation and discussion. Sonia, Lizette.
Sí, buenas tardes. Esta es la intérprete español, Sonia Román. Ahora se va a presentar mi colega, Lisette Olivares.
Hola, buenos días. Habla Lisette Olivares. También soy una de sus intérpretes de español. Por favor, estén atentos a las instrucciones que van a ser ofrecidas en la pantalla. Va a haber un icono para seleccionar español, Spanish. Tendrá que usted apretar ese icono que parece un mapa de un globo mundial para poder seleccionar el español y para poder escuchar todo traducido al español en el canal. Gracias.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to provide an overview of the format for our meeting this afternoon. This meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be part of a recorded meeting, please go ahead and disconnect. The recording and transcript will be posted to the project website. At this time, we have 20 people, are members of the public, participating in the meeting today. I'm going to suggest a few tips on how to best participate in the virtual meeting. I know many of you are familiar with Zoom, but I'll briefly review a few tips to help you navigate the meeting today. This is a Zoom webinar as opposed to a Zoom meeting. It is slightly different than some more informal Zoom meetings that you may have participated in. To preserve bandwidth and have a smoother virtual meeting experience, you may want to close other programs that are running on your computer. If you have any issues with Zoom during the meeting, we have a technical support person available to assist you. You can reach this person, Laura Peretti, by email at lparete@fhistudio.com. You can also use the chat feature if you need technical help with Zoom. If you are disconnected at any point during this meeting or are having bandwidth issues with your internet, there is an option to telephone into the meeting. You can use the toll-free number on your screen to access the meeting if you are disconnected, or joining via phone is simply a better option for you. That number is 312-626-6799. If you telephone in, you will need to enter the meeting ID, which is 830-4192-4245. The passcode is 959479. Lastly, Zoom is generating closed captions for this meeting that should be showing up at the bottom of your screen. If you are seeing them and want to turn them off, or if you are not seeing them and want to turn them on, please do so by clicking the button in your Zoom toolbar that says CC. I will soon turn this meeting over to the team to provide a presentation on the I-95 Stamford PEL study. After that, we will turn to the discussion session when you, the members of the public, will have the opportunity to share your comments. Today, all participants are placed on mute until the discussion period, which will follow about a 30 to 40-minute presentation. During the discussion period, there are two ways that you can provide feedback or ask a question. The first is through raising your hand to speak aloud to the study team and all participants. We will also accept and respond to your written questions during the discussion period. We will alternate attendee participation between the raised hand speaking method and the Q&A written methods. Our goal is to get feedback from everyone today. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. After the presentation, at the beginning of the discussion period, we'll invite anyone here to share a comment. You can indicate that you would like to share a comment by raising your hand. You will be identified with a yellow hand towards the top of the participant list. This means that you are requesting to speak. If you are not seeing the raise hand in your Zoom toolbar, you may need to click on the participant button in your Zoom toolbar. The button will show up at the bottom of the window in the participants pane. Please turn on this function so that you can see when your turn is coming up. If you call in by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and we will be able to call on you. When it is your turn to speak, we will call out your name. Our technical host will then request that you unmute yourself. Please click unmute before you begin speaking. When we unmute you, please state your name slowly and spell your first and last name. If applicable, please indicate any organization that you are affiliated with. Please be mindful of the time so that everyone has an opportunity to speak. If your comments are lengthy, you can also submit them in writing. We'll identify ways to do this later in the presentation. We also ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. All comments tonight will be taken into consideration by Connecticut Department of Transportation. The comments that you make tonight will be recorded and summarized in a meeting summary. We will also take written questions throughout the meeting. Staff will provide answers to your submitted questions towards the end of the meeting. Please submit your questions in the Q&A Zoom button, not in the chat button. Representatives of the media can direct their media inquiries to the Connecticut Department of Transportation Office of Communications. Their email is ctdotmedia@ct.gov. No person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. The Connecticut Department of Transportation has more information on this policy in their civil rights flyer, which can be accessed at https://bit.ly/ctdot civil rights. The department is also asking members of the public to visit and complete their demographic survey at https://bit.ly/ctdot-feedback. We are adding these links to the chat feature in Zoom now. I will now turn it over to Jonathan Dean from the department to welcome you.
Thank you, Marcy. Again, my name is John Dean. I'm the project manager on the study in the Connecticut DOT Major Highways Unit. I'm going to introduce our study team real quick. Mike Calabrese is the Division Chief of Highway Design. Neil Patel is the principal engineer of the Major Highways Unit. Joe Belrose is the project engineer working on this study. The next slide, please. So the consultant team that you'll be hearing from today, Marcy Miller, as you've already met, is the head of community engagement from FHI Studio. John Eberly is the project manager from Stantec, who are the prime consultants on this project. Emily Valentino is a transportation engineer from Stantec, and Mike Paiwanski is an environmental planner also from Stantec. And next slide, thank you. Real quickly, the agenda that we're going to be following this afternoon. This is the welcome and introduction now. Then we'll be getting into an overview of our study, and then the existing conditions that we have found so far in the early parts of our study. And then we'll get into the study schedule and the next steps that we'll be undertaking. And then finally, we'll have a period of Q&A, or you can leave comments at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to John Eberly.
Thanks, John. So what I want to cover before I turn it over to some of our folks is the where and the what we're doing. But I'm going to start with the where. So as everyone knows, obviously, this is one of the most congested corridors in the state. Our study is basically focusing on interchange exit 7 to exit 9 generally. And we actually are starting to head over to exit 6 to pick up some additional area. And the focus is on the main line. I'm going to talk a little bit about local road networks because that's just as important. But the other aspect of the study is the I-95 bridge over Myrtle Avenue and Metro North Railroad. And that's actually the impetus of the study. That bridge is coming to the end of its useful life. And the department decided that while we're looking at alternatives to replace that bridge, extend the study out so that we can really try to take a look at the corridor as a whole. And as part of that, we are actually not just focused on the main line, but we're also looking north and south of the main line into local road networks, because the local road network improvements are going to play a role in the overall review and solution, hopefully, of the congestion and safety operations in this area. Just some quick facts. What everyone already knows about Stamford is that it carries lots of traffic through the area. Some 200,000 vehicles make their way from and to I-95 through the ramps and carry through. So that's a lot of traffic. A lot of that is on interchanges 7 and 8. And anyone who has traveled in the area knows that. So 7 and 8 have very high volume ramps, and it's going to be a focus on the study and what we're looking to do out here. As everyone knows, I-95 kind of splits the downtown and southern areas and neighborhoods, but they're interconnected in many ways. Motorists, bus, rail, obviously. Pedestrians and cyclists are key, and that's going to be part of this study as well. So we're not just looking at motorized traffic, but bike and ped as well. So one of the things that we're trying to do here is to develop a vision for the I-95 corridor between exit 7 and 9. And we're hoping that vision will address, obviously, the replacement of the I-95 bridge over Metro North Railroad and Myrtle Avenue, but also at the same time improve safety, operations, mobility in the corridor, and on the surrounding local network. And that's going to be important. You're going to be hearing a lot about that, not only today, but as we go forward. The goals of the project are going to include improved connectivity and livability within the corridor, enhanced social equity and economic vitality. While we're doing that, we're looking to minimize impacts to both the natural and built environments. So that's key. So what is a PEL study? It's probably very foreign to folks if you haven't done any homework on it. It is a planning and environment linkages study. It is an FHA recognized process. And what it attempts to do and does do is connect transportation planning, which is what we're focused on, but mixes with environmental and community concerns early in the process so that we can kind of understand what we're doing. There is more information if you want a detailed look at what the PEL study represents, and there's some links there, and this will be up on the website. Marcy will talk a little bit about that later, but you'll have an opportunity to go in and look at videos and whatnot to get a better picture. But at its core, the PEL study is essentially kind of a linear way of looking at elements. You can go to the next slide. And what that process is number one, trying to identify the transportation issues in there. We've been talking to a lot of you folks over the past year, and we're starting to, understand the corridor. Once we identify the transportation issues, it's really important, we can't stress this enough, to highlight the environmental and community concerns. And we've heard a lot of that over this past year. So we got to mix that. Once we have that, we want to determine the priorities in the corridor. There's going to be a number of improvements, a number of solutions. We want to identify the priorities of those. Ultimately, this is going to lead to a vision or a master plan for needed transportation improvements in the corridor. Once we have what those improvements could be, we're going to also look to identify mitigation opportunities and strategies for any impacts that they might create. Ultimately, this will create a roadmap to the National Environmental Policy Act, and I won't go into great detail there. But this is kind of the first phase in trying to understand what the corridor is, what the problems are, and what are some of the alternatives. A later phase, which is NEPA, will go deeper into analysis of alternatives and ultimately lead to design of any preferred alternative that comes out of later work. The other key thing here I want to stress with folks, and very important part of the study, is while I-95, the main line, may be a long time in developing environmental permits, documentation, and design, we are actually looking for very quick wins, advanced projects that we can get out there early, whether they're on the local road network or anything like that, to advance some of the improvements that we don't have to wait for a 5-year, a 7-year project process. So you're going to hear us talk to you a lot about that. We're going to really look for some feedback from you. The other thing I want to mention here that's very important, and as I indicated, we've been meeting with a lot of folks out here. Community engagement is not just one of these blocks. It doesn't happen at one time. It's throughout the entire process. We've been working on this for a year, and we've met with a lot of folks, and we're going to continue to meet with a lot of folks because, quite frankly, you folks know a lot more about the corridor sometimes than we do. So it's going to be important to get your feedback. You can go to the next slide. So the benefits of the PEL study, real quickly, I'm not going to get into great detail on all of this, but it streamlines the efforts, from the beginning planning into NEPA and even beyond. We're doing some of the, the heavy lifting right now, trying to do the data collection, understanding what's going on, and developing some high-level alternatives that a next team can then take without having to start from scratch and accelerate that work. So overall, it actually, while we're doing some of the work now, ultimately it will shorten the process or the time of the process from beginning to end. And also, the other part of this is it engages non-transportation agencies in the decision-making process, and that's also key. So that's kind of the where and the what. And what I want to do is I want to turn it over to Emily Valentino, who is our transportation engineer, and Mike Pawlonsky, because we've been working on this for a year, and I'll come back to schedule a little bit later. So there's findings that we have both on traffic and environmental resources that we want to kind of share. But even beyond, you're probably going to hear this again. If there's things that we're talking about that you think we may have missed as far as critical, we're not going to talk about everything today. It's really important that you highlight those for us because we need that feedback going forward. So, Emily, I will turn it over to you to start talking a little bit about what we found on the traffic side.
Great. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
So I will begin with some fast facts about transportation in our study area. And this won't come as a surprise to most of us on the call. And John had alluded to this earlier, but this stretch of I-95 from exit 6 to 9, it's one of the most congested corridors in the state. Some articles even suggest this might be top 3 in the nation. So about 200,000 vehicles use the I-95 ramps into and out of Stamford and the I-95 main line on a daily basis. We've got about 3,000 passengers that ride the 341 bus line in the study area, and about 1,500 pedestrians walk around I-95 during the day. The train station is the second busiest Metro North station in the network. So now let's talk about the current traffic conditions within the study area, and I'll explain how we did that. First, we monitored traffic on the I-95 main line. We also looked at all ramps between exits 6 and 9, as well as 50 intersections on local roadways around Stamford. So after we studied the existing conditions, we understand what's happening today, we look to the future. How will the area be different? What new developments will be built that could impact traffic? What other roadway projects will be constructed that may impact traffic flow? How will the population and employment change in the region? And how will that result in changes to traffic in our study area? So some examples of developments that we included in our analysis are shown here below. So we had the Stamford Station parking garage, Metro Tower, and the Peninsula at Harbor Point, just to name a few developments that will impact demand. We also looked at some planned roadway developments that will impact traffic flow, most notably the Greenwich Avenue corridor improvements, as well as the addition of auxiliary lanes on I-95 between exits 6 and 7. We also looked at other factors that will influence traffic in the study area, such as planned park improvements that may impact pedestrian flow in the area. You can move to the next slide, please. So these are just some examples of what we took into account when we look to understand what the future will look like in terms of traffic. So let's go back to existing, and this is kind of an agenda of what I'll talk about next. First, we will look at how long it takes to drive from exit 6 to 9 during normal conditions without traffic and with traffic. We'll also take a look at where trips begin and end their travel. Then we'll look at the conditions of traffic, both on I-95 and on the local streets, and a little bit about the crash history in the area. Travel time, when there is not congestion, traveling from exit 6 to 9 in both directions for about 3 miles, it takes 4 minutes when there's no traffic. However, when there is traffic in the southbound in the morning, that jumps up to 16 minutes from exits 9 to 6. In the northbound, in the PM rush hour, from exits 6 to 9, that takes about 10 minutes. There is an increase of travel time during congestion. We also looked at travel patterns during the morning rush hour. Where do most people exit I-95? So in the southbound direction, 14 and 21%, so 35% of the vehicles that are on I-95, they get off at exits 7 or 8 into downtown Stamford. About 43% of those vehicles don't use any of the study area exits, and they just travel straight through toward exit 5 and further south. In the evening rush hour, we looked at northbound trips from the Stamford area entering onto I-95. Results were similar to the morning rush hour in that the majority of vehicles using I-95 come from downtown Stamford. So that's about 29% of vehicles on the I-95 main line come from the Canal or Elm Street on-ramps. And again, about half of the traffic on 95 doesn't use our study area ramps at all. They just drive straight through on the main line. Next, we ranked the quality of traffic conditions on I-95 based on performance. So in the image below, you'll see a depiction of the grading level of service, or what we call LOS, A through F. So level of service A and B, those are the best qualities of service. Traffic is free flow. That would be the 4 minutes of travel time that I talked about a few slides ago. There are no delays in LOS A or B. In LOS C or D, still acceptable levels of service. There are some restrictions to travel speed, but delays are minimal and they're considered acceptable. In level of service E or F, this would be considered failing or deficient travel conditions. So the speeds decline significantly and delays are significant. So what does that look like on our main line on I-95? So we studied level of service. Just to back up, we studied both weekday and weekend peak hours. The analysis showed that weekday conditions are worse than weekend. So today I'll only talk about weekday results. So in the morning, in the southbound direction, the majority of I-95 in our study area operates below an acceptable level of service. So that was level of service E or F, which I just described in the previous slide. This is caused by the heavy ramp merges onto the main line, as well as downstream traffic that is limiting the flow to travel southbound. When we looked at northbound, the evening rush hour operates slightly better than the morning, with pockets of acceptable and then unacceptable levels of service going in the northbound direction in the PM peak. We also studied level of service on those 50 intersections on the local roads. So we found that 3 intersections operate below an acceptable range, 3 of the 50. That's not to say there aren't individual movements of the other intersections that might operate below an acceptable level. So perhaps a right turn lane. This, what we're showing here, is just the overall intersection. So as I mentioned, 3 of 50 operate below an acceptable level. And those are North State Street at Washington Boulevard, Elm Street at Tresser, and East Main Street at Glenbrook Road. Then we looked at the PM rush hour in the evening. 2 of the 50 signalized intersections operate below that acceptable range, and that's at South State Street and Canal, and at Elm Street and Tresser. And you can see the red dots on this image on the right to show the locations of those 2 intersections. Now we will get into the crashes. We studied 5 years worth of crash data from 2016 to 2021. And we found what you see on the map here is a heat map. So the more red indicates more crashes. And we call that heat map. And crash clusters occur. So you'll see the red kind of blurbs. They occur on curves usually and at ramp merges. So you'll notice segment 5 there in the middle doesn't have many crash clusters. It doesn't have any red in it. So that could be because it's a straightaway and it doesn't have any ramp merges. Of note as well, there were 4 fatalities on the main line or on one of the I-95 ramps between exits 6 and 9. We also looked at crashes on the local roadways for the years 2016 to 2021. There were 48 signalized and 2 unsignalized intersections that we studied. And Route 1 at Glenbrook Road has the highest crash rate. And we also saw clusters, as you can see on the map, along Route 1 and at Atlantic Street. Again, there were 4 fatalities on the local roads within the 5-year study period, 3 of which were along Route 1. I will now hand it over to Mike, who's going to talk about environmental resources.
Thank you, Emily. In addition to the traffic analysis that Emily just described, during the initial phase of the study, we documented a real wide variety of social and natural environmental resources in the study area, including, for example, parks and recreation areas, wetlands, floodplain, rare species, hazardous materials sites, and everything, all the other resources listed in this slide. Today, we'd like to review our findings of a few of what we thought were the key environmental issues in the project area. But please, we know that you are the local experts, so let us know if there are other environmental resource issues that you think are important to our study. Next, please. I'd like to start with pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities. In addition to vehicle travel in the study area, we also found really high levels of non-vehicular travel as people moved around the study area as pedestrians, bicyclists, and people using transit, including buses, Metro North Rail, and Amtrak. And the bus travel in particular is enabled by a really extensive bus route system in the study area, as you can see on the route map on the left side of the screen. We've also found that most roads have sidewalks, but some are in poor condition. And at many intersections, the sidewalks lack access ramps and crosswalks. So overall, it's important to understand all the ways people travel in this area as we can continue to consider transportation improvements. The study area passes through a number of environmental justice neighborhoods, which are areas having higher levels of low income and minority residents. And looking to the figure here, the orange and the gray are environmental justice neighborhoods sort of based on the US Census, and virtually the whole study area is in one of these neighborhoods. Overall, the city of Stamford has 36% minority population, but in the study area, it's a little different. 53% of the study area has greater minority population than the city average. 100% has a lower average household income than the city average. And up to 40% of residents live in households with limited English speaking, or live in limited English speaking households. So this is very important information to understand as we continue our public engagement process during the study. Next, please. Historic resources. This study area has a rich inventory of historic buildings and historic districts. A few examples of these really great historic buildings in this area include the old main post office on Atlantic Ave. This is the photo on the left, which is just a really beautiful building. The Pike House on Fairfield Ave, which is over 150 years old. And the Church of the Holy Name on Washington Boulevard. So again, it's important to identify and protect these historic resources because they are such an important part of the study area. And finally, highway noise. Emily described the really high levels of traffic that pass through this area, and with all this traffic comes the noise associated with it. And in the initial part of the study, we identified noise affected neighborhood, and those are those areas indicated in yellow on this slide. And as we continue with the study, we'll continue to identify noise affected areas that may come about as a result of any modifications to the highway. And building on that, noise mitigation will be evaluated in a future NEPA study to reduce noise levels for residents who live adjacent to the highway. You can see that's generally noise barrier walls, as can be seen in other areas along the highway, in other areas within the study area. And next, I will pass it on back to John, who will review the study schedule.
Thanks, Mike. So we've looked at where, we've looked at what, and now I just want to kind of touch very quickly on when. We've been working on this study over the past year. Just about a year ago, we started to ramp up. We've looked at relevant studies in the corridor. We've met with a lot of folks to try to understand the corridor, and we've done our data collection and technical analysis that, obviously Emily has shared. We're about to turn our attention to starting to identify the actual needs of the corridor and the resources. We'll develop some alternative developments and concept designs as we go forward. And we'll be coming back to you folks even before we get too far into that to try to get some feedback. But as we go through there, you'll be seeing a lot of engagement on those. Ultimately, we will look at the various alternates that we come up with. And we'll do an impact assessment. And this will be a fairly high level to screen out alternates that just are not reasonable or have too many impacts or whatnot. And again, it's very important that this study is not identifying the one alternative that will be the preferred alternative. That's for later. What we're trying to do is look at a number of alternatives that are reasonable to be studied further. So that's a very important part of the study. Ultimately, we'll bring everything together into a PEL study recommendation. That will likely be in late 2024, early 2025. So the total breadth of the study is basically a 3-year time period, and we're a year plus into it. So stay tuned. And again, we'll be reaching out to you on a number of occasions here. So the ongoing tasks right now that we're looking at, I indicated we're looking at the corridor and infrastructure assessments. Data collection we've already done. We are starting to look at the existing and no build conditions way in the future. We'll develop needs and sufficiencies analysis, and we are currently working on the purpose and need development. And again, we'll be back out to you folks as we come to these different milestones. We'll look at the high level concept development, and the key thing, and we're going to run this into the ground, stakeholder and public engagement is really key. You know, we've talked about it a number of times. Marcy, if you can kind of take it from here, because this is one of the critical aspects of a PEL study.
All right, thanks, John. All right, so in the past year, we've started a number of different outreach features. The first thing we always do on a study like this is we outline what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, and we put that into a stakeholder engagement plan. This can be found on our study website. And what we do is we go back and revisit it at least once per year, and we check in, you know, is this working? How are we reaching people? Do we need to adjust because of a pandemic or whatever? But we do try to remain flexible. We do the same thing to coordinate with our agencies. You know, as Mike mentioned, we have a lot of environmental things that we need to consider, and there's a lot of agencies, in addition to stakeholders, who really care and they're watching to make sure that, you know, we're diligent. And so that's something else that we put together as part of this study. I mentioned the website. We put a lot of things up there. That's I-95Stamford.com. We encourage you to go check. Once this meeting is over, we will also put a copy of the presentation up there. And then once we're done with the meeting notes, those will also go up there. Social media. We are using social media as a presence. Please come find us, track us, you know, connect to us through your organizations. We've also have had really good success with social media advertising for meetings and things like that. So I think you can expect to see us continue to do that sort of thing. Any comments that come in, we're tracking people who care and who talk to us, and you can all expect a response. We've done so far about a dozen stakeholder meetings. We will continue to do them probably throughout much of the project. And these include different agencies such as CT Transit, Metro North, as well as neighborhood groups. You know, our neighborhoods in this area, you know, they're pretty organized. And if you want to talk to us, we will come to you. So please reach out. And then finally, so far we've done about 2 fact sheets, and we will continue to do more to keep you up to date on the latest and greatest in the project throughout the entire study. There are ways to stay involved. I mentioned the social media. These are how you access. We also have a hotline that has English and Spanish speakers. So that's 203-993-6529. It's also on our website. You can also submit comments through the website. We're going to have future meetings. This is one of many. And then finally, you heard from Jonathan Dean early on, and you will again in a few more moments. And he is our project manager at the department. His email is jonathan.dean, and that's JONATHAN.dean, DEAN @ct.gov. So you're always welcome to email him with questions or comments. As far as our immediate next steps, I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to embark upon. So Emily mentioned and Mike mentioned that we are doing a lot of homework on the existing conditions in the corridor. And we're going to package that up into a report that will be reviewed by the department, and it ultimately will be posted online. So we're in the process of working on that. John mentioned the vision and goals. This is something that we work with our stakeholders on, and you're welcome to provide feedback. You know, what John said earlier, does that make sense to you? Do we want to accomplish those things that he suggested? And then we get into how can we fix some of these problems? This is what we call our alternatives analysis. We will move into that. And then finally, my role in the project is outreach, and we're going to continue that through the very end. And one of the big things that we will start up in the next 6 months or so is a project advisory committee. And this is where we have representatives of our, you know, many key stakeholders, our neighborhoods, our agencies, where they come together and help us guide the process. And they do provide input throughout. We'll do more public meetings. We'll be out in the community this summer when it warms up a little bit and we don't have 7 inches of snow on the ground, for pop-up events where we'll table and ask lots of questions. And finally, we will continue with media outreach. I'd be curious to hear how people heard about the meeting today, because we did do quite a bit of outreach through social, the buses, and things like that. So you can expect to hear from us, and we always welcome your suggestions on how to make that better. And then finally, I want to momentarily turn it back over to John Dean, who will facilitate our discussion. And again, for anyone new, I do see a few new people that have jumped on the call since we started. So I will give a quick review on how you can participate today. There are two ways that you can provide feedback or ask a question. The first is through raising your hand in the Zoom feature, and I already see people are starting to do that, so thank you. And the other is that if you raise your hand, you'll speak aloud to the team as well as everyone here. And then we will also accept questions and comments through the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. A little more on the verbal comments. When John invites people to share a comment, you can indicate that by raising your hand. I now see two raised. Those hands that for people that want to speak are identified as yellow. If you are not seeing the raise hand function in your toolbar, you may need to click on participants in that toolbar, and then the raise hand button will show up on the bottom part of that participants list, and it just depends on your computer setting. Please turn the function on so you can see where you are on that list to speak. If you're calling in by phone, please press *9. That is how we will know you want to speak. And then when it is your turn to speak and Jonathan Dean calls your name, I'll say on his behalf, I apologize if he mispronounces your name. Our technical host will then ask you to unmute yourself. And so when you do that before you begin speaking, please unmute yourself. State your name slowly. If you can, we'd appreciate if you spelled your first and last name, especially if your name is not identified in the participant list. We ask that you be mindful of time. We do want to give everyone the opportunity to speak. 5 minutes is a good amount of time. If your comments are lengthier than that, please submit them in writing. And finally, I'll give a little more on the written Q&A. This is where you can type in your questions, and then Jonathan will read them aloud and either answer them himself or call on the appropriate technical person from our project team to answer them for you. Quick note, please make sure that you do type those questions in the Q&A button in your toolbar, not in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. And I do see that there are 3 hands raised at the top of our list. So maybe we'll start with those because we do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you, Marcy. Yeah, and again, please feel free to add any more questions in the question and answer panel while we're covering these verbal comments. So first, we'll call on Zachary. Please, what's your question or comment?
Hello, my name is Zachary Oberholzer. How much is this survey going to cost?
So the total study budget right now is approximately $7 million.
Okay. That seems like a complete waste of money to me. I don't understand why we need a 3-year survey to figure out what's wrong with I-95. Like, it seems like you have the crash data already. The problem with I-95 is that the trains run too slow in Connecticut. Like, that seems to me like, take that 7 million, straighten out those train tracks, and let's get more people on the trains and out of cars. Like, this seems like a waste of money. And you can't have a 3-year timeline to do something like this. Like, you just can't. Like, we can't be spending all this money and all this time studying problems. Like, this seems baffling to me.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that comment. So just to kind of, sorry,
I
do you have anything further?
I had one more
okay,
thing.
Sure.
The other problem is there's no safe places for pedestrians to cross under I-95 currently. We have the sidewalks and like signals are there, but you're dodging traffic and people making right-hand turns on red coming on and off a freeway, which is just very unsafe. I don't have a solution to that, but there's no safe pedestrian ways or bike ways to get underneath I-95 currently. Sorry, now I'm done.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so just to kind of go over quickly, you mentioned, or we mentioned the 3-year timeline that we have. And so really, it's not just we've kind of gathered the existing conditions data. And really there is a lot of documentation that we have to do to kind of prove not just, I-95 in Stamford is congested, and you all certainly know that, but to come up with our traffic models and the like, to really get a solid insight on what the particular problems are with the signals, with the ramps, with the highways, and not just that, but bike and PED facilities, as you mentioned. And a big part of this study too is looking at the bridge which carries I-95 over Metro North. We're starting to plan for that, has approximately 10 years of service life. And really the big challenge on I-95 for this study is going to be how might we replace that bridge in the future while still carrying the I-95 traffic. But I do just want to point out that this PEL process, it gives us a lot of options for speeding up potentially future phases, so that the projects that are identified from our study will go into the more rigorous NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. This process can help jumpstart that and save us time in the future. But as John had mentioned earlier, there are potentials for early projects that might be identified even sooner than that. So things like you mentioned, potentially improving an intersection, improving bike and PED safety. So just to tackle that part of your comment, thank you. We really appreciate that. We did go on a field walk with People Friendly Stamford, which is a bike and PED advocacy group in Stamford, and really gave us an appreciation for some of the challenges that are faced by folks that are walking and biking and running. And certainly those areas under the rail line are potential improvement points that we noticed, where there could be improved lighting and other features that help folks get through there safely. So
if you'll indulge me one further comment, because I just want to make this very explicit. If you spend there's a limited pool of money. If you spend $7 million studying problems, that's less money that you have to go fix those problems. And I think it's important to just be very cognizant of that fact. The US tends to get less bang for its buck on infrastructure spending, exactly partially because of this problem.
Great, thanks for that comment. Okay, so now we will move on to Angelo. Please, you have the floor.
Hi, so thank you for having this meeting. My name is Angelo. I'm actually a member of People Friendly Stamford. I live just outside of the study area. I work in the study area. I also travel there for all sorts of things, whether it be recreation or whatnot. And I do primarily walk. I also take transit. I don't have a car, so obviously pedestrian and transit issues are very important to me. I know that the study is examining all options for alternatives. I think it was pitched as, and I just wanted to preemptively advise against any widening of any roads in the area, including I-95. The area already is an interstate highway bordered by North State Street, South State Street, the urban transitway, Route 1. There's a lot of high-speed, high-capacity roads running parallel through the study area. And it seems that having all of these mini highways of sorts just running through the area hasn't worked if it hasn't fixed the car traffic. I think that it plays into a broader issue of kind of induced demand for this. We see that other cities throughout the country, like LA and Houston and Dallas, have built freeway upon freeway upon freeway, and it hasn't solved traffic. Instead, they're some of the most congested cities in the country. So I wanted to just preemptively say, advise against any road widening in the area, especially given that this could only, there's only a 6 to 12 minute difference in traffic through this area. I think it was identified earlier, 4 minutes versus 12 minutes or something. Obviously, there's a lot of environmental impact of trying to induce more demand for driving by widening roads. It would increase noise pollution, it would increase air pollution, it would widen the tear in Stamford's urban fabric. You basically have to traverse an area, a couple of city blocks to walk from downtown to the south end. And it's kind of dangerous, it's very dingy, it's not well lit. And anything that would further widen it would be just kind of a step backwards. I appreciate the accident data you showed, because there obviously is a high accident rate along adjacent roads. I personally experienced that when I try to cross Greenwich Avenue, where the off-ramp or the northbound off-ramp on exit 7 is. There are cars that will speed very, very fast. And obviously that leads to a lot of crashes, and it leads to me being, very concerned about walking along the road, trying to cross the road. And as you mentioned, there are thousands of pedestrians, there's thousands of bus riders. It's a very busy rail corridor. So there's a lot of people obviously at risk for all of these adversities. And I wanted to say that those alternative methods of transportation are probably the most viable solutions to this. I think Zach said that there are a lot of people who take the train along this area, and obviously improving service along that would be great. But I also wanted to emphasize that I think the data you presented today demonstrates that I-95 isn't just a throughway. I think 57% of people are getting off in Stamford in the morning data that you presented, and 52% of people are getting on I-95 from Stamford in the evening data you presented. So that means that really one of the best kind of alternatives would be improving intercity connection from Stamford northbound to southbound. We already have a bus system, but obviously any upgrades to that would go a long way. I think you mentioned that the bus from Stamford to Norwalk is perhaps the busiest in the city, and that thousands of people use it. So that could be a quick win that I think that the project people said they want to achieve. There's a lot of highway-like roads conducive to high speeds in the area, as you mentioned, whether it be Tresor Boulevard, Washington Boulevard, Atlantic Street, and improving any pedestrian or cycling safety along those roads, I think would be another quick win. I don't know, due to the parameters of the study, if they can be achieved before 2024 or 2025, but that would be great. As you may have heard, there was a double pedestrian fatality along Washington Boulevard very recently. And it definitely grabbed a lot of people's attention throughout the city. I think we're all horrified by the fact that someone was driving 90 miles an hour down one of these roads, a state-controlled road, and the city can't do anything about it. So if this is a project that the state DOT is working on, I'd call on them to prioritize making state roads that run through the study area much safer. A lot of these surrounding intersections, as you mentioned, operate at adequate traffic levels, I think 47 out of 50 or 48 out of 50 intersections. So I don't think that there's any need to try to expand them or widen them. But one thing that I don't think this study area has and could also serve as a quick win is protected bike lanes. I think that would be great too. I want to be cognizant of time, so I think I'll leave my comments at that, but thank you for having this meeting, and thank you for giving the opportunity for me to comment.
Thank you, Angelo. Yeah, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And yeah, so I won't be able to address every comment that you made, and certainly if you have more, please feel free to submit them in writing. But we will be going back out to the public as we do develop our alternatives, and as we mentioned, this will be public input will be weighed at each step of our study. So no decisions at this time have been made as to how the congestion on 95 will be handled, or we're certainly looking at alternative means of improving the operations, not just widening, but things such as adding auxiliary lanes between exits, or trying to consolidate some of the number of ramps that we have. And again, I do want to stress that that bridge over Metro North is an important part of this study, and as is safety on the main lines, and certainly on the local streets in our study area, and for vehicles and for all other users.
Yeah, John, if I just jump on that, because there was a lot there, Angela, good points. And as John just indicated, it's not, strictly a mainline improvement plan that's coming up with. The other thing that we have to understand, and we've heard loud and clear from a lot of folks, is how, the main line, the ramps, and where they're located, and how they operate, or how they don't operate, perhaps better to the point, how they interact with the local road network. So that's really what we're trying to do, is, not just focus on the main line, but look at a bigger vision of how this area can work. So I think to John's point, it's not just, knee-jerk slap on extra lanes throughout the entire, corridor. It's a lot more intricate than that. So, yeah, good points though.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we have a phone caller, 203-274-5743. Please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Frances Lane. That's Frances with a CES, Lane, Lane. I live in the downtown district on Trezor Boulevard. So I only live about 2 blocks away from that double pedestrian fatality with the guy speeding down Washington Boulevard at that high a speed. So I try to do a lot of walking, would like to do more walking, because I'm legally blind. I'm considering getting a service dog. However, I like to see, work done on the sidewalks. I believe, as you were saying, in some places they're in bad repair, which I agree. Just really about the government center, it's all cracked and uneven. But I'm also wondering, you guys thinking about doing talking crosswalks, could that also be helpful? With people who have disabilities, and I'm not sure when you're doing your data collection, did you do a breakdown between, people who are, over 60, versus younger than that, and also people who have disabilities, whether you also captured that particular information in your data collection? And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments and your questions. So, yeah, so as you mentioned, Francis, we did inventory the sidewalks in our project area, and certainly where traffic signals are revamped in the future, they will meet all ADA and PROWAG requirements. So new traffic signals would have accessible features and be up to code in that sense. I don't believe we did collect.
May I make just one more comment?
Oh, sure.
Concerning the talking. So you guys, are you going to have, like you said, you're going to have like a focus group or a study group or something like that? I would love to be on that as a person with disabilities. So you're going through, look at the sidewalks and, crosswalks, and hoping talking crosswalks and things like that. So if I can call into that, hotline number and leave my name and information. Can I do that?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, if you're able to go on our website at I-95Stamford.com, you can find our project hotline number there, or we also have an email address, or I think we also had my email address up earlier in the presentation as well. So that is also on the website. Yeah, please do reach out to us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you again. Yeah, so again, just to wrap up on that middle part of your comment there, I don't believe we collected such detailed demographic information as to folks, seniors and folks with disabilities, but again, when we do our designs, they do take into account all users. So we do try to be sure that the traffic signals are accessible. The walking time that's given for the pedestrians is accessible for everybody. Okay, so next up in our call-in comments is Ali, I believe. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. My question is that if there is any coordination with New York State, if there is any projects on the other side of the border in New York State long-range plan or even transportation improvement program that might impact I-95 corridor.
Great. Yeah, thank you. We haven't coordinated with New York State yet. We are aware they did just complete a big project down at the 287 interchange. So we'll be sure to incorporate any effects from that as we need to. But yeah, certainly we want to be cognizant of all of the planned improvements in the region.
I think, John, it's also important to point out that, we're not doing this study in a complete vacuum. There's other, studies going on in Greenwich or whatever. So, and we're coordinating between the two projects. So there is coordination going on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so we do have a comment in the Q&A here. I will read it out loud. So the question is there any consideration being given to Governor Lamont's Executive Order 21-3, which requires Connecticut DOT to work toward a VMT, that's a vehicle miles traveled, reduction goal that has been set at 5% per person? Yeah, so thank you for that question. We, as a department, do have that goal that has been set, and that's something that we're going to follow for all of our projects where possible. So I think in this area, there's definitely the potential for transit improvements, bike pedestrian improvements to help it folks make a switch from driving into downtown to using some other mode of travel. So I think in this area we have some unique opportunities, given that Metro North is so heavily used, and certainly the other modes of transportation.
Yeah, John, and I'll just add Neil Patel, DOT, just to add to that. I think that's something that we heard as John Eberly mentioned, in terms of the pedestrian access, and if we can improve the ped and bike access to the Stamford Transportation Center, I mean, that in itself, increase in transit access is going to help us achieve that goal, as you had mentioned, and trying to change that behavior in terms of trying to get more folks to utilize transit. And yeah, we're lucky we have that component here in Stamford, because it is adjacent right to 95 and the local road network here. I think looking at some of these, complete streets, if it's possible, on some of those adjacent roadway network, is something that we'll look at. I think one of the other attendees mentioned that in terms of dedicated bike lanes, where it can be incorporated. Those are all the things that are going to go into this study in terms of how we can achieve some of those goals. And I think, you know, one of the things that this process, I know one of the other gentlemen talked about, why does it take so long? Why are we spending this money? Again, this part of the process with the outreach, we're doing it ahead of the NEPA phase, which is very, you know, we have to follow those federal regulations in order to dollars and to get to construction. So again, this part of the phase here with the process that we're using in this PEL study will help us shorten the time frame for that next phase, which is that NEPA study, then in-depth environmental study. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Are there any more questions or comments? Please feel free to raise your hand or type into the Q&A. And again, we encourage you to visit our website. Feel free to email us or give us a call if you think of something that comes to you later on. This certainly won't be the last time we're going to be accepting feedback.
All right, hey, John, I do see a couple of people starting to drop off. And people are welcome to stay on. The study team will stay on for a few more minutes, just in case some people do call in late, or we have a few stragglers. But again, we appreciate everyone's time today, and we hope you found this session useful and informative, and we definitely look forward to talking with you again throughout our study.
Thank you again, everybody, on behalf of the department and the study team for joining us this afternoon.